So, this next special guest needs very little introduction, and mainly because there's very little left to say about him. He's been a performer his entire life. He comes from a family of extraordinary performers, but when I think of this person and I think of the history of his life, I don't think of him as just as a talented actor and singer. I think about who he is as a human being. He's someone who embraces life beyond the level of stories you can imagine, on every side of the globe. And he takes ownership in making that phrase, think globally, act locally. He takes ownership beyond almost any human being that I know. Please help me in welcoming my dear friend, committed statesman, Mr. Edward Albee.
First of all, I'd like to thank my dear friend David and let you all know that the breakup of our relationship was just as sordid as the devil. Talking about Linda and Cameron, I'd just like to throw in my 2 cents.
Can't see your hands.
Oh, all right, all right. A few of you may know that of my involvement with Native American stuff over the years. It's selfish. I get more out of it than I give by 1,000-fold.
Tell us more.
But I will eventually. There's a story, a Chumash, which is the Indians around my area, a Chumash story that I'd like to tell you. Now, James took a fair amount of heat, and possibly with some basis, for getting up and accepting his Academy Award and saying, "I am king of the world." And really all he was doing was he was making a joke and quoting the thing from the movie and stuff. But the Chumash story goes this way. And I think that one of the things that happens with celebrity, and I've been in the limelight my entire life, even when I wasn't any kind of a celebrity. So I have an awareness of how that sword cuts 2 ways, and how that coin has 2 sides. When he stated that he was king of the world, even if he was making a joke of it, even if he was, quoting his film, which deservedly he'd survived incredible odds in making it and struggled. And I had friends on it who'd actually quit the show because he was so difficult to get along with, or the situation was so difficult to get along with. But the story goes something like this. A little worm peeked his little head above his little mound of worm soil, and he looked around, and he said, "I'm king of the world." And the thing about envy is that once you state that, you have to be careful, because down from a tree came a robin, plucked him and ate him, and flew up to the branch of his tree, preened his feathers a little bit and flapped his wings and puffed out his chest and said, "I am king of the world." And the thing about envy is that once you put yourself in a position of being envied, there is someone who will try to tear you down. And as the robin was up there preening and saying that he was king of his world, a hawk came down and hit him. And the hawk ate him and took him back up to the rocky crag, and was sitting there looking hawk-like over the canyon, preening himself and saying, "I am king of the world." And the thing about people, once you've stated that, they have to prove to you that they are king of the world. And as that hawk was up there preening himself and looking lordly over his canyon, wildcat came up behind him, snagged him off his crag, ate him, climbed up to his higher rocky lair, snuggled down and started licking himself. "I am king of the world." And all of a sudden, a shot rings out, and the hunter climbs up shouldering his gun and grabs the wildcat and thinks, "This will make a good pelt. Goodness, I'm king of the world." And he slips, and he tumbles, and he falls, boom, he hits his head. And he passes on, and time passes, and one day a worm comes up out of his eyesight, looks around and says, "I am king of the world." just an ordinary fellow who's here. Very grateful to be here. Thank you so much. Doing what I do. Isn't David a sweetie pie? Can we have another hand for David Schwartz, please? David absolutely has been such a motivating engine behind so many of us over the years, and sort of keeping this vibrant and alive and keeping the relationships glowing. He's an extraordinary man. And I'm only saying this because he ain't in the room. Okie dokie. Well, we had a Q&A session earlier today with some hardcore Edward Albert geeks. First of all, let me say to you guys, forgive me if I go over the same ground in some of the cases, because I tried to cover as much as I could for your benefit, and now for the benefit of the folks here, I may cover some similar ground, so be patient and don't boo till I finish. Thank you. It's been an extraordinary year. My entire life, I had sort of in the back of my head somewhere, and said it to my parents, and eventually to my wife, and which annoyed the heck out of her, that my life would begin at 45. And yes, I had my life, which was extraordinary as a young kid, dealing with the challenges and the opportunities and the blessings that bestows. And somewhere in the back of my head, I always knew that my life would begin, for me, at 45. And on that birthday, a couple of years ago, I made a pledge to myself that I would try to find all the things in my life that I loved. And first of all, be very grateful for them. And then try to make the paths converge a little bit, so that the areas that I've worked in that weren't necessarily obviously connected to each other would begin to connect. Because my sweet dad at 93 basically does say, and has always said, that there's only one important thing in life: relationships. A lot of stuff may seem important, but it's the relationships that you make that count. And that when life gets challenging and overwhelming, that will help see you through. I've spent a good deal of my life carrying on a tradition of public service, which I just want to, like I said before, reiterate that it is the most selfish thing a human being can do. So I want nor deserve any credit for anything that I've done, because I'm just following a family tradition, and it's something that when I do, I get so much more back from that I'm embarrassed to even tell you. I feel like I've already lived 20 lives. The combination of the travel associated with making films, and I've been all over the world in some of the most extraordinary places and some of the most extraordinary situations. I mean, some of you may know from previous discussions that I was in Red Square when the tanks came in Moscow, filming Ice Runner. We were in Russia for 11 months, 2 months ago at the Arctic Circle, a week and a half at the geographic North Pole, and literally in Red Square when the tanks started rolling in, and we had I remember a 16-year-old Russian trainee. We were all sitting there we'd been shooting a chase sequence where these two black Volga sedans are chasing me across Red Square with Lenin's tomb and the extraordinary St. Basil's Church, and I was, all padded up because I was doing my stunts, as some of the weirder of us tend to do. All of a sudden we hear this terrible rumbling, and I'd seen in the morning, when I woke up, I looked out the window and I saw virtually endless lines of armored personnel carriers coming down the road with guys with black berets. And literally saw the only person on the street was a granny, about 4 foot high, dressed all in black, throwing cabbages at the tanks as they went by. And I'm sitting there going, don't piss them off, don't piss them off.